Hold me, use me, just get me out of here, she whispered, capturing stars left behind. She had always believed that life was simple, predictable, and safe. In her small town, the streets were quiet and the neighbors knew each other by name. The sun rose gently over the hills, and the mornings carried the scent of fresh bread from the bakery at the corner. Every day felt like a rhythm she had learned from birth. Wake up, get ready, greet her family, go to work, come home, and share small moments of laughter and conversation. Her life, though ordinary, was comforting. She had friends she trusted, a family who loved her, and small dreams that kept her heart alive. She worked at a local bookstore, a place she loved because it smelled of paper and ink, and the walls were lined with stories from all over the world. Every day she arranged the shelves, recommended books to visitors, and sometimes spent hours reading in the quiet corners. It was a peaceful life, filled with ordinary joys. She had a favorite cafe nearby where she would sit in the afternoon sun, sipping tea and watching the town go by. People knew her smile, her calm presence, and her gentle way of speaking. Though her days were simple, she had plans for the future. She dreamed of traveling to the mountains she had read about in books, exploring forests, and seeing the world beyond her small town. At night, she would lie on her bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining the adventures she might one day take. The thought of new experiences excited her, even if they were far away. She wrote small notes in a journal, little plans she hoped to achieve. Her life felt full of promise, though nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen. One morning, as she walked to work, she noticed something unusual. A man was standing across the street, leaning against a lamp post, watching her. At first, she thought it was a coincidence. After all, people often waited on the streets. But as days passed, she saw him again and again, always in different locations, yet always keeping his eyes on her. Her heart would beat faster whenever she noticed him, but she tried to convince herself it was nothing. I must be imagining it, she whispered to herself. Yet a small unease settled in her chest, one that she could not shake. She told her closest friend about it one afternoon while they were sitting in the cafe. Her friend frowned and suggested she be careful, to pay attention to her surroundings. Sometimes it's better to be cautious, her friend said gently. But the young woman tried to brush it off. She was independent and strong. She did not want to live in fear. She decided to keep walking the same paths, visiting the same places, and following her daily routine. Routine was safety, or so she believed. The day started like any other. She woke up early, drank her morning tea, and prepared for work. The streets were empty, save for the occasional passerby and the morning baker arranging fresh loaves outside the shop. She felt a small thrill in the air, the simple comfort of knowing her world. But something in the air felt off, subtle, almost unnoticeable. The quiet seemed heavier that day, and the shadows lingered longer on the sidewalks. She shook off the feeling and continued her walk, telling herself that worrying without reason was foolish. By mid-morning, she arrived at the bookstore. The familiar scent greeted her, and she smiled at the cashier. She organized the shelves, helped customers find books, and even spent a few moments lost in a novel about a young traveler exploring faraway lands. It was the kind of story she loved, adventures, challenges, and triumphs. But for a brief moment, she wondered if life could hold similar surprises. She laughed softly at the thought. Little did she know that life was about to surprise her in a way she could never have imagined. After work, she walked to the cafe as usual. The streets were now busier with people returning from errands, children playing, and cars passing by. She took her usual seat by the window, ordered her favorite tea, and watched life move outside. She noticed again that man from the street. He was standing at the edge of the square, seemingly waiting for something. Her heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to look away, focusing instead on her notebook. She wrote about the story she had been reading, crafting little ideas for her own adventures someday. Yet, the feeling of unease would not leave her. quietly growing like a shadow at the corner of her mind. The evening came, and she decided to take a slightly longer route home, enjoying the last rays of sunlight. The streets had taken on a golden hue, and she felt a small sense of calm wash over her. She noticed familiar faces, waved at a neighbor, and greeted a shopkeeper closing for the day. Everything seemed ordinary. But then, in a narrow alley, she felt a sudden shift. The air felt heavier, and a strange silence replaced the normal sounds of the evening. Her heart beat faster, and she instinctively looked around. There was no one in the alley, yet an invisible weight seemed to press on her. She hurried through, telling herself she was imagining things. That night, she returned home and locked the doors carefully. She sat on her bed, thinking about the day, about the strange man, and about the feeling that something was not right. She tried to calm herself, telling herself that life had always been simple and that things would return to normal. She took deep breaths, sipping water, and tried to focus on her plans for the weekend. A short trip to the countryside, something to lift her spirits. Her mind wandered to stories she had read about courage, resilience, and survival. She never imagined she would soon need those very qualities in her own life. She fell asleep slowly, her mind restless with little thoughts and concerns. Deep down, she felt a tiny spark of worry she could not explain. Perhaps it was instinct, a feeling she could not name. She dreamed of walking through fields of light, of feeling free, of being safe. In those dreams, life was still simple and predictable, still full of ordinary joys. But the next morning would bring a change so sudden and so harsh that her world would be turned upside down, leaving her to face challenges she had never imagined. Even as she stepped out into the new day, the streets bright with sunlight, she still did not know how quickly life could change. She walked confidently, greeted familiar faces, and moved through her routines with ease. The ordinary rhythm of her life was comforting, almost like a shield. But sometimes, shields can hide dangers lurking just beyond sight. She had no idea that the shield of normalcy she trusted so dearly was about to be tested in ways she could never have prepared for. Her last moments of complete innocence passed quietly. She smiled at the baker, waved at a passing child, and breathed in the familiar scents of her town. Everything seemed the same, yet the subtle tension she had felt in recent days was a whisper of the storm ahead. It was a calm before a storm, a quiet moment that would soon be shattered. And as she moved forward into the day, she unknowingly stepped closer to a terrifying reality, a reality that would test her courage, resilience, and hope in ways she had only ever imagined in stories. The morning had started like any other, with the sun spilling its gentle light over the town and birds singing in the quiet streets. She walked along the familiar path to the bookstore, her bag over her shoulder, humming softly to herself. Yet, beneath the rhythm of ordinary life, an uneasy feeling had been growing for days, small and quiet, like a shadow she couldn't see clearly. Today, that shadow would become a reality she could no longer ignore. As she turned a corner near the old park, she noticed movement at the edge of her vision. For a split second, she thought it was a passerby or a delivery man, but something about the figure was different, too deliberate, too steady. She quickened her pace slightly, telling herself it was probably nothing. But before she could reach the safety of the main street, she felt a sudden, sharp force behind her. Panic exploded inside her. She tried to scream, but a hand covered her mouth, muffling the sound. She twisted, struggled, and kicked, but the grip was firm and unrelenting. Fear coursed through her veins as adrenaline surged, and her mind raced in confusion and terror. She realized, in a chilling instant, that she was being taken somewhere against her will. The figure moved quickly, pulling her into an alley that was narrow and empty. She stumbled, trying to resist, but the force was too strong. Her mind screamed for help, for anyone to notice, but the streets were deserted, and the walls of the alley swallowed her cries. She could feel her heart pounding, each beat echoing in her ears like a warning drum. She tried to focus, to think clearly, but fear clouded every thought. After what felt like endless moments, the struggle ended abruptly as she was pulled into a dark, confined space. She could barely see, her eyes adjusting to the dim light that filtered through cracks in the walls. The air was heavy and stale, carrying a faint, unpleasant odor. She sank to the floor, trembling, trying to catch her breath, and slowly realized the terrifying truth. She was trapped, alone, and at the mercy of someone else. Her first instinct was to scream again, but her voice barely escaped. She tried to stand to find a way out, but the door was closed and sturdy, and the windows were small, barred, or too high to reach. Every attempt to move or shout only reinforced the cruel reality of her situation. She was completely alone in a place that was unfamiliar and frightening. She sank back to the floor, hugging her knees, and let herself cry for a few moments, tears flowing freely. After the initial shock passed, she began to assess her surroundings. The room was small, with cold, concrete walls and minimal light. There was a small cot in the corner, a rough blanket, and nothing else. No windows she could reach, no obvious way to escape. Her stomach churned with hunger, thirst, and anxiety. She realized she might be here for a long time, and the thought made her shiver uncontrollably. She tried to remember everything she had learned in life about staying calm and safe in emergencies. She had read stories, watched documentaries, and heard warnings from friends, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of being trapped. She forced herself to breathe deeply, to slow her racing heart, and to think logically. She needed to survive, and survival required patience, courage, and careful observation. Days passed, and with them came the harsh reality of her captivity. She was given little food, barely enough to keep her alive, and water that was often lukewarm or limited. Sleep was broken by fear and uncertainty, and the darkness of the room pressed down on her like a heavy weight. Each passing hour was a test of her strength, both physical and mental. She began to notice patterns: when her captor came, when food was given, when the doors were unlocked briefly. But escape remained impossible. Even in the darkness, she found small ways to fight back, ways to hold on to herself. She counted breaths, memorized details of the room, and listened carefully to every sound. Sometimes she whispered stories to herself, imagined herself in familiar places, or replayed comforting memories of her family and friends. These small acts of imagination became her anchor, a way to keep her mind from slipping into despair. Hunger became a constant companion. She felt her stomach growl, her body weaken, but she refused to give up. She rationed the little food she was given, ate slowly, and drank water sparingly. Each meal became an event, a moment of temporary relief, but the emptiness inside her reminded her of the cruelty of her situation. She could feel herself changing, growing more cautious, more alert, more aware of every detail in the room. Survival demanded vigilance. Her thoughts often turned to her family and friends. She imagined their faces, their voices, their smiles, and the warmth of their presence. Each memory was bittersweet, a reminder of everything she had lost, and a spark of hope that she might see them again. She whispered their names in the darkness, promising herself that she would not give up, that she would find a way back to them. These promises became her lifeline. Fear was constant, but it did not consume her entirely. There were moments of quiet reflection, when she allowed herself to think about life outside the walls. She remembered the sun on her skin, the laughter of friends, the smell of fresh bread, and the sound of birds singing. These memories strengthened her resolve, reminding her that the world she loved still existed, and that she had a reason to survive. She began to notice the patterns of her captor, subtle changes in routine, moments of distraction, or small signs of humanity. Sometimes her captor spoke in quiet tones, sometimes left her alone longer than expected. She learned to observe, to wait, to plan. Each day became a test of patience, each hour a lesson in careful observation. Even in captivity, she discovered resilience she had never known she possessed. Loneliness was her constant companion. The silence of the room was deafening, broken only by the occasional sounds from outside or the footsteps of her captor. She spoke to herself to keep her mind active, repeated affirmations, and imagined conversations with loved ones. She drew invisible maps in her mind, planned routes of escape, and rehearsed scenarios over and over. Her mind became her strongest tool, her imagination a weapon against despair. Yet, despite her courage, the fear never completely left her. Every noise, every shadow, every step in the corridor made her heart race. She had to remind herself constantly to breathe, to stay calm, to focus on small victories. The days blurred together, each one a mixture of hope, fear, and survival. She learned to treasure small things, a sip of clean water, a moment of sunlight through a crack, a kind word spoken softly. These became anchors, reminders that life, though harsh, still held moments of light. Her body changed too. Hunger and confinement took a toll, but she refused to give in. She stretched when she could, moved quietly, and tried to maintain strength for the day when escape might be possible. She became more alert to every detail, more aware of every sound, smell, and movement. Survival required attention, patience, and courage, and she gave herself both in equal measure. In the quietest moments, she allowed herself to dream. She imagined running through fields of sunlight, feeling the wind on her face, embracing her loved ones, and returning to a world where she could be free. These dreams were fragile, but they were also powerful, giving her hope and keeping her spirit alive. Even in the darkest hours, she knew that hope was a weapon and she clung to it fiercely. Days turned into weeks, and though the struggle was immense, she never gave up. Each moment of fear, each pang of hunger, each second of darkness strengthened her resolve. She learned that survival was not just about the body, but also about the mind and heart. Her courage, patience, and determination became her shield, protecting her from despair. Even in the depths of captivity, she discovered a strength she had never known she possessed. The fear, the hunger, the darkness, they could not break her spirit entirely. She whispered to herself in the quiet, promising that she would not be defeated, that she would find a way back to the world she loved, to the life she cherished, and to the people who mattered most. And though she could not see it yet, the first spark of hope, the first glimmer of possibility was beginning to grow. A quiet but powerful light that would guide her through the darkness, through fear, and toward freedom. Time in the dark, small room began to blur. Days passed in endless cycles of hunger, fear, and quiet observation. At first, every second had felt like an eternity, but gradually she learned to measure time differently. The rising and setting sun outside, the sounds of footsteps in the hall, even the subtle changes in light through cracks became her markers. She clung to these small details to maintain a sense of reality, a fragile thread connecting her to the world beyond the walls that trapped her. Her body grew weaker from lack of food, yet her mind became sharper. She studied every routine, every habit of her captor, noting the times the door opened, the pauses, the changes in voice or mood. She discovered that even in the most controlled environment, patterns existed, and patterns could be used. She began planning silently, creating strategies in her mind, imagining the right moment to act, the right moment to escape. Each plan was rehearsed over and over, practiced mentally so that when the opportunity came, she would be ready. Despite the hunger and the confinement, she refused to let despair consume her. She remembered her family's faces, the laughter of friends, the comfort of her home. She whispered their names in the darkness, repeating their voices like a mantra to keep her spirit alive. Memories of past moments brought both comfort and pain, reminding her of all she had lost, yet strengthening her resolve to survive. The thought of returning to those she loved became her driving force. To distract herself from the harsh reality, she created small routines. She would stretch quietly in the corner, imagining the freedom of walking in open fields. She counted repetitions, recited passages of books she had read, and created imaginary conversations with her loved ones. These exercises were more than distractions. They were acts of survival. They preserved her mind and gave her a sense of control in a situation where everything else was beyond her power. Sometimes, fear would strike suddenly. A sound in the corridor, a shadow moving outside, or a door creaking would make her heart pound uncontrollably. She would curl up on the floor, taking slow, deep breaths to calm herself. Each time, she reminded herself that panic would not help. Survival demanded patience, calm, and sharp observation. Each wave of fear was met with an equal determination to endure, to stay alive, and to keep hope alive. She also paid careful attention to her physical health. Despite her weakness, she moved as much as the space allowed, stretching her arms and legs, shifting her body to maintain some strength. Each small movement reminded her that her body was hers to protect, and that even in captivity, she had the power to care for herself. She found small ways to conserve energy while also keeping her muscles engaged, preparing herself for any moment when speed and strength might be required. As the days wore on, she began to experiment cautiously with her environment. She listened for loose locks, examined the corners for weaknesses, and tested the walls silently, trying to find a way to make contact with the outside world. Each tiny discovery, no matter how insignificant it seemed, felt like a victory. Even small signs of potential escape renewed her determination and reminded her that freedom was not impossible, only delayed. Hunger and thirst remained relentless. She rationed every bit of food and water, eating slowly and deliberately, aware that her survival depended on conserving every resource. Hunger sharpened her mind as much as it weakened her body. She became meticulous in observation and careful in planning. The deprivation, while painful, forced her to rely on her inner strength and resourcefulness in ways she had never imagined. In the quiet moments, she reflected on her life before captivity. She remembered the warmth of her family, the simple joys of walking through her town, the laughter of friends, and the peaceful moments at the bookstore and cafe. These memories became a lifeline. They were more than nostalgia. They were evidence that a life beyond these walls existed and that her fight was not in vain. She clung to the idea that one day she could return to that life. She also thought about the strength of the human spirit. Stories she had read, films she had watched, and lessons from school came back to her. People could survive unimaginable hardship, she reminded herself. She could, too. This belief, small but powerful, kept her grounded. Each time despair threatened to take over, she reminded herself that survival was a choice, and she chose it every single day. One of the hardest challenges was loneliness. The room was silent except for occasional footsteps, yet even in this silence, she felt the weight of isolation pressing on her. She spoke to herself in whispers, told stories, and imagined conversations with friends and family. She found comfort in routine and in small, creative acts that kept her mind occupied. In a strange way, this solitude became a teacher, showing her how strong and resourceful she could be when forced to rely entirely on herself. Sleep, when it came, was restless and filled with dreams of freedom. She imagined herself running through fields, feeling sunlight on her skin and breathing fresh air. In these dreams, she could touch the world outside, see her family, and live without fear. Waking up from these dreams was painful, but they also reminded her that hope was still alive. Each morning she greeted with renewed determination, ready to face another day, another challenge, another test of her strength. She also paid careful attention to her captor, trying to understand patterns of behavior. She noticed small signs, moments of kindness, distractions, or lapses in attention. Each observation was stored in her mind, a piece of the puzzle that could one day create an opportunity for escape. She learned to read subtle cues, a shift in footsteps, a change in tone, a pause that revealed weakness. These small lessons became tools she could use when the moment came. At times, fear and despair would return with intensity, but she refused to let them dominate. She would take slow breaths, focus on her memories, and remind herself of her purpose: survival. Each challenge, each pang of hunger, each lonely moment was met with a quiet determination to endure. She discovered that resilience was not born from comfort, but from adversity, and that even in darkness, strength could grow. Over time, she also found ways to keep her mind active through imagination. She recounted stories she had read, imagined new adventures, and even practiced small mental exercises to sharpen her memory and attention. Each day she strengthened her mind as much as she preserved her body. She realized that survival was not just physical, it was mental and emotional. Her spirit had to remain intact for her to endure. Even in the darkest hours, she found small sparks of hope. A sound from the hallway, a crack of sunlight through the walls, or a shift in the routine reminded her that the world beyond the room still existed. She learned to seize even the smallest glimmer of opportunity, to hold on tightly to hope, and to prepare herself for the moment when she could act. Through all of this, she discovered courage she never knew she had. Each day of fear and uncertainty became a testament to her resilience. She learned patience, observation, and the power of hope. She realized that even when the body is weakened, the mind and spirit can remain strong, and that the smallest spark of determination can guide one through even the darkest moments. She began to see herself differently, not just as a victim of circumstances, but as a survivor. Every small act of resilience, every observation, every quiet plan of escape was proof that she was not defeated. Though her body was tired, though hunger gnawed at her, and though the walls closed in around her, her spirit remained unbroken. And deep inside, a small but steady flame of hope continued to burn. She whispered to herself in the darkness, promising that she would endure, that she would survive, and that one day she would step out of this room and back into the world she loved. This promise became her shield against fear, her anchor against despair, and her guide toward the light that she knew must exist beyond the walls that confined her. Weeks of fear, hunger, and uncertainty had passed, and she had grown stronger in ways she never imagined. Her mind was sharp, her senses alert, and her hope, though fragile, had never been extinguished. She had studied every sound, every movement, and every routine of her captor. The dark room, which had once felt like a prison without end, had become a place of careful observation, a place where she prepared silently for the moment that might bring her freedom. One evening, as the faint glow of sunset filtered through the narrow crack in the wall, she noticed a change. Her captor's routine, which had always been steady and predictable, shifted slightly. A door that usually closed completely was left slightly ajar, and footsteps in the corridor paused longer than before. She crouched in the corner, heart pounding, and watched intently. Could this be the opportunity she had been waiting for? Every instinct screamed caution. She knew that one wrong move could make the difference between survival and disaster. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to steady her racing heart, and to observe everything with care. The small shift in routine might be an accident, a distraction, or a test, but she had to prepare. She rehearsed her movements quietly in her mind, imagining herself slipping through the door, running into the light, and escaping the darkness that had held her captive for so long. That night she lay awake, listening to the quiet house around her. Every creak of the floor, every distant sound, was analyzed and remembered. She noticed patterns she had never paid attention to before. The time her captor usually went to another room, the sounds that indicated a door might be unlocked, the faint noise of the outside world beyond the walls. She realized that patience and observation had brought her closer to opportunity. The weeks of waiting, of careful attention, were beginning to pay off. Over the next few days, she moved cautiously, testing the limits of the room and the behavior of her captor. She tried subtle things, shifting objects slightly, leaving small signs that she was aware, noting which doors and locks were weaker. Each tiny action was measured and deliberate. She could not afford mistakes. Every movement had to be perfect, every decision carefully calculated. The tension was exhausting, but her determination outweighed her fear. Hunger and weakness continued to challenge her, but she had learned to conserve energy and focus on the essentials. She ate slowly, preserved strength, and saved energy for the moments that mattered most. Her body had grown leaner and more agile, and her mind had grown sharper and more alert. The long days of confinement had taught her patience, and patience was now her greatest weapon. Finally, one day, she noticed a real opening, a small window of opportunity that seemed just wide enough to act. Her captor had left the room momentarily, distracted by something in another part of the building. The door, normally locked tightly, now had a simple latch that could be moved quietly. She held her breath, heart hammering, and carefully approached the door. Every step was deliberate, every sound measured. Her mind replayed her rehearsals, each movement flowing in her imagination until it felt automatic. She reached the door and with trembling hands manipulated the latch. Her heart skipped a beat as the door slowly creaked open, just enough for her to slip through. The corridor beyond was dimly lit, but it was real, it was space, and it was freedom. She moved quietly, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, every sound. She reminded herself to stay calm, to stay alert, and to focus on one step at a time. One mistake could ruin everything. The hallway seemed endless, each step a test of courage. She paused at corners, listening for sounds, peeking around edges, and taking slow, careful breaths. Her mind was a mix of fear and exhilaration, fear of being caught, exhilaration at the possibility of escaping. She reminded herself to trust her instincts, to trust the preparation she had done over countless days and nights. Every step brought her closer to freedom, closer to the world she had longed to see again. Finally, she reached a stairwell. The stairs were narrow, the shadows deep, and every creak seemed amplified in the quiet. She descended slowly, listening carefully. The outside world was just beyond the final door. She felt the thrill of possibility coursing through her, but she kept her steps quiet, deliberate, and measured. Patience, observation, and courage had brought her here, and she could not allow excitement to betray her now. At last she reached the final door. It was slightly unlocked, just as she had hoped. Her fingers shook as she turned the handle, but the door gave way. A rush of cool evening air greeted her, filling her lungs and igniting a sense of liberation she had not felt in weeks. She stepped outside, feeling the ground beneath her feet, the sky above, and the wind on her face. For a moment it was almost overwhelming, so much light, so much space, so much life. She ran, at first slowly, testing the streets, then faster as adrenaline surged. She kept to shadows, moved carefully, but could not resist the joy that rose in her chest. She had made it out. Freedom, real and tangible, stretched before her. The town she had known so well now felt both familiar and new. Every detail, the sound of distant traffic, the smell of the evening air, the faint laughter of people in the streets, reminded her that the world still existed and that she could once again be a part of it. Eventually, she reached a busy street, filled with people and lights. She approached a small cafe still open and explained her situation to the owner, who immediately called authorities. She was taken to a safe place, offered food, water, and care. The exhaustion that had built over weeks crashed over her, but it was mingled with relief, gratitude, and a sense of accomplishment. She had survived, she had fought, and she had returned to life. The next days were a mixture of medical attention, interviews with authorities, and quiet moments of reflection. She received care for the physical effects of hunger and confinement, but also began the emotional work of understanding what had happened. She spoke with counselors, shared her experiences, and slowly began to process the fear, confusion, and courage that had carried her through the ordeal. Each conversation was a step toward healing, each moment of understanding a piece of reclaiming her life. Even as she recovered, she thought about the lessons she had learned. She had discovered a strength within herself she had never known. Patience, observation, courage, and hope had carried her through the darkest hours. She had realized that even in moments of fear and weakness, the human spirit could endure, adapt, and triumph. Her experience, though harrowing, had revealed the resilience that lay within her, a resilience she would carry forever. She also reflected on the kindness of strangers, the cafe owner, the authorities, and the people who helped her regain her sense of safety. These small acts of care reminded her that even in a world that could feel cruel and frightening, compassion and help existed. She realized that survival was not just about strength, but also about trust and connection. Life, she understood, was a balance of courage, vigilance, and hope. As the days turned into weeks, she began to reconnect with her family and friends. The joy of seeing familiar faces, of feeling their warmth and love, was overwhelming. She shared her story, not to dwell on fear, but to honor the strength and courage that had carried her through. She found comfort in their support, laughter in shared memories, and hope in the promise of new experiences. Her life, once ordinary, now felt deeper, richer, and more precious. Though the memory of fear and captivity remained, it no longer defined her. She had survived, adapted, and reclaimed her life. She had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the determination to act despite it. She had learned that hope could be a guiding light, even in the darkest of times. And she had realized that freedom, once taken for granted, was now a treasure beyond measure. In the quiet moments of reflection, she understood that her journey had changed her. She would never forget the terror of confinement, but she would also never forget the strength, patience, and resilience that had allowed her to endure. Her experience had shaped her into someone who could face life's challenges with courage, who could cherish every moment, and who would never again take the simple joys of life for granted. And so, as she looked out at the evening sky, the sun setting in shades of gold and pink, she breathed deeply, feeling a sense of peace she had not known in weeks. She had survived the impossible. She had fought, endured, and emerged stronger. Life awaited her, full of promise, beauty, and hope, and she was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. After the terrifying weeks she had endured, the first moments of freedom felt almost unreal. The air outside smelled fresh and alive, the sky stretched endlessly above, and the sounds of the town, voices, footsteps, laughter, and distant traffic, reminded her that the world she had longed for still existed. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe without fear pressing down on her chest. Her legs shook, not just from exhaustion, but from the sudden awareness that she was alive, safe, and moving in a world that was still hers. The cafe owner who had helped her greeted her with kindness, offering a warm drink and comforting words. She sat quietly, letting the warmth seep into her body as she slowly processed the reality around her. The authorities arrived shortly after, gently guiding her through procedures, taking her to a safe place where she could recover. At first, the blur of questions, forms, and officials felt overwhelming, but she reminded herself to breathe and take each moment slowly. She was safe now, and that was the most important thing. Medical attention came next. Her body, weakened by hunger and confinement, needed care. She received nourishing food, water, and rest. Each sip, each bite, each quiet moment of recovery reminded her that survival was a process, not just an instant. Her muscles ached, her stomach protested, but with each passing hour she felt a little stronger. The simple acts of eating and resting, once taken for granted, now felt miraculous. She discovered how fragile and yet how resilient the human body could be. Counselors and professionals began to speak with her gently about her experience. She described the weeks of confinement, the fear, and the uncertainty. Talking about it was difficult. The memories were sharp, raw, and sometimes overwhelming. Yet she also realized that sharing her story was part of healing. Each word spoken aloud was a step toward reclaiming her life, a way to understand what had happened, and a way to acknowledge her strength in surviving it. Even in her recovery, moments of fear would return unexpectedly. Shadows, loud noises, or sudden movement could trigger memories of captivity. But with each instance, she learned to recognize the fear, to breathe through it, and to remind herself that she was safe. Her resilience, built over weeks of careful observation and patience, became her shield. She discovered that courage was not just about bold actions, but also about facing lingering fears with honesty and determination. Family and friends soon arrived. The relief of seeing familiar faces, feeling their warm embraces, and hearing their voices was indescribable. She had imagined this moment countless times in the dark, whispering names and holding onto hope. Now, it was real. Tears flowed freely as she embraced loved ones, each hug a reminder that she was not alone, that life continued, and that love remained a constant in her world. The ordinary life she had once known now felt precious and extraordinary at the same time. During these days, she reflected deeply on her experience. She realized how much she had learned about herself, her patience, her strength, her ability to endure fear, hunger, and uncertainty. She thought about the small victories during captivity, moments when she observed patterns, rationed food carefully, and maintained hope. Each of these acts, though unnoticed at the time, had built the foundation for her survival. She understood now that resilience is often quiet, growing silently in moments of darkness. She also thought about the kindness of strangers. The cafe owner who had offered help without hesitation, the authorities who had guided her to safety, and the professionals who cared for her both physically and emotionally. All of these people reminded her that even in a world that could feel cruel, compassion existed. These acts of care reinforced her belief in humanity, giving her hope that the world could be a place of safety, support, and kindness. Recovery was not instant. She had to rebuild strength, both physically and mentally. Simple activities, walking in the sunlight, eating freely, talking with friends, or simply sitting quietly, became small milestones. Each step forward reminded her that life was precious, that her body and mind were capable of healing, and that she had the power to embrace each day. The ordinary joys she had once overlooked now held profound meaning. She also spent time reflecting on the emotional lessons she had learned. Fear, hunger, and isolation had tested her, but they had also revealed a strength within her that she had never fully recognized. She realized that even in situations beyond control, one could find moments of agency, patience, and courage. She had discovered that hope could sustain a person through the darkest hours, and that careful attention, planning, and determination could open the path to freedom. Gradually, she returned to routines she had once taken for granted. Walking through her town, visiting familiar cafes, and browsing through the bookstore where she had worked, all these ordinary activities felt renewed with meaning. Each step, each smile, and each interaction became a celebration of life and resilience. She savored these moments, understanding now that freedom and safety were precious gifts, to be cherished and never taken for granted. Her story also became a source of inspiration. Friends, family, and even strangers learned of her courage, patience, and survival. While the ordeal had been frightening, it had also highlighted the power of the human spirit. People were moved by her determination, her hope, and her ability to endure. She realized that sharing her experience without dwelling on fear could help others understand the importance of resilience, preparation, and hope in facing life's challenges. Even as she healed, she remained vigilant. The lessons from captivity, observation, patience, awareness, stayed with her. She knew that the world could be unpredictable, but she also knew that she had the strength to face difficulties with courage. Every decision, every action, every small moment of awareness became part of the tools she carried forward, reminders that she had survived and grown stronger because of what she had endured. In the quiet moments, she allowed herself to dream again. She imagined traveling, exploring new places, and experiencing the freedom she had once taken for granted. She visualized herself living fully, embracing life with gratitude and courage. These dreams were not just fantasies. They were affirmations of life, proof that hope had survived, and evidence that the world remained a place of possibility. Slowly, she also began to think about giving back. The experience had shown her the importance of help, care, and compassion. She wanted to support others, to share knowledge about resilience, and to offer comfort to those facing difficulties. Her ordeal had changed her perspective, opening her heart to the importance of community, empathy, and action. She realized that even after fear, life could be purposeful and meaningful. As weeks turned into months, she continued to rebuild her life. She maintained connections with her family and friends, returned to routines, and nurtured her mind and body. She discovered new strengths, formed new habits, and appreciated the world with renewed gratitude. Life, she realized, was not just survival, it was growth, healing, and the celebration of every small moment of freedom. She often reflected on the journey she had taken, from ordinary life to fear, darkness, and finally freedom. Each stage had taught her something valuable: patience, observation, courage, hope, and resilience. She understood that even in the most frightening circumstances, the human spirit could endure, adapt, and triumph. These lessons would stay with her forever, shaping the way she lived and the choices she made. One quiet evening, as she walked through the town square, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on her face, she paused and took a deep breath. She thought of the days of fear and darkness, of hunger and isolation, and then of the days of freedom, safety, and love. She realized that her experience, though painful, had transformed her into someone stronger, wiser, and more grateful for the simple joys of life. She smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. Life had tested her in ways she could never have imagined, but she had survived. She had endured, adapted, and emerged stronger. The fear, the hunger, and the darkness no longer defined her. They had strengthened her, taught her, and revealed the power within. She had reclaimed her life, and she would never again take a single moment of freedom, love, or safety for granted. And as she continued walking, surrounded by familiar streets, friendly faces, and the soft glow of evening, she felt hope glowing brightly inside her. She had survived the unimaginable, and now she was ready to live fully, to embrace the world, and to cherish every moment. Life awaited her, filled with promise, beauty, and possibility, and she was ready more than ever to step into it with courage and gratitude.